Not just basketball. Attention. Every move, every quote, every free agency whisper, every social media post. LeBron didn't just play in the NBA. He controlled the spotlight around it. This was the same player who turned a team switch into The Decision, a nationally televised event that transformed his career into a media empire. So when reports started surfacing that LeBron might not want a retirement tour, people didn't see humility. They saw strategy. Because for maybe the first time in his entire career, the man who built a kingdom on spectacle suddenly appeared ready to walk away quietly. And that's exactly when Charles Barkley struck. No polished diplomacy. No politically safe analyst talk. Just Charles being Charles. According to the firestorm that followed, Barkley's reaction wasn't framed as respect for LeBron's legendary run. It was framed as something much harsher. That LeBron might be avoiding the farewell spotlight because deep down, he knows what that spotlight could expose. Decline. For years, LeBron's greatness felt untouchable because even as he aged, the numbers still looked unreal. 20-plus points. Historic milestones. Triple-doubles at 40. Longevity nobody had ever seen before. But numbers can protect a narrative only for so long. The eye test is crueler. And in 2026, the eye test had become uncomfortable. At 41, LeBron was no longer the unstoppable physical force who could erase defenders, control every inch of the floor, and dominate both ends by sheer will. Sciatica issues, visible where selective defensive effort and carefully managed bursts of greatness had started creating a dangerous new conversation. Not, is LeBron still great? How much longer can greatness hide decline? That question alone changed everything. Because a retirement tour isn't just celebration. It's exposure. Every arena becomes a microscope. Every road game becomes a final audit. Every bad shooting night, every defensive lapse, every younger star cooking you on national television becomes part of your goodbye. Kobe Bryant embraced that. His final season was messy, inefficient, painful, and often brutal to watch. But that was the point. Kobe let the world see every bruise, every miss, every final ounce of competitive fire. He didn't protect the myth. He performed through its collapse. And that contrast is where Barkley's criticism cuts deepest. If LeBron skips the grand farewell, critics don't see modesty. They see narrative control. Because LeBron has spent too many years carefully shaping his public image for people to suddenly believe he just wants to disappear gracefully. This is the same athlete whose career has often felt like a masterclass in message management. From championships to player empowerment to legacy debates, LeBron has rarely allowed the story to drift too far from his hands. So now, with age finally entering the conversation louder than ever, the suspicion grows. Is this retirement decision about peace or preservation? Barkley's broader point, whether fair or not, taps directly into that fear. Maybe LeBron doesn't want the year-long tribute because unlike Kobe, unlike Jordan's Wizards farewell, unlike legends who let the public witness the final erosion, LeBron may understand that every extra month under the spotlight could weaken the one battle he's been fighting his entire life. The GOAT debate. Because greatness is complicated. Longevity matters. Stats matter. Rings matter. But image matters too. And LeBron's image has always depended on maintaining the balance between dominance and undeniability. A season-long farewell tour risks replacing King James with something far more dangerous. Aging superstar, carefully declining icon, legend losing ground. And once that image fully settles in, no amount of career points can completely erase it. That's why this story exploded so fast. Because Barkley's criticism wasn't really about one retirement decision. It was about motive. It was about whether one of the most calculated superstars in sports history was making one final calculated move. To leave before the curtain gets pulled back too far. To exit before standing ovations turn into sympathy. To control the final chapter before basketball writes it for him. And maybe that sounds unfair. Maybe LeBron truly just doesn't want the circus. But when you've built a career this massive, this public, this debated, people don't just analyze what you do. They question why you do it. Especially when Charles Barkley is standing there, ready to say what millions are already thinking. Because now the conversation isn't just about retirement. It's about fear. Fear of decline. Fear of public vulnerability. Fear that after spending 23 years chasing Michael Jordan's shadow, LeBron's final move may not define how great he was. It may define how much control he needed over how greatness ends. And if that debate was already explosive, it was nothing compared to what happened when people started digging deeper into why Barkley's criticism of LeBron was never really about retirement at all. Because Charles Barkley's criticism doesn't become explosive until you understand what sits underneath it. The belief that LeBron James has spent the final stretch of his career protecting numbers with the same intensity he once used to chase championships. And that changes everything. For most athletes, aging is obvious. The explosiveness fades. The injuries pile up. The box score shrinks. Eventually, the game humbles everyone. But LeBron's late career arc complicated that natural story because, statistically, he kept doing things nobody his age was supposed to do. Historic point totals, triple-doubles, all-time records, milestones that looked impossible. On paper, it felt immortal. But Barkley's style of criticism has never been about paper. It's about context. And context can be brutal. Because while LeBron continued stacking historic numbers, critics increasingly questioned what those numbers actually represented. Were they still translating to peak control? Or were they becoming legacy insulation? This is where the stat padding accusations started gaining real traction. Not because LeBron stopped being elite, but because his priorities appeared different. Every superstar manages energy with age. That's normal. Jordan did. Kobe did. Kareem did. But LeBron's critics argue that his version sometimes looked less like strategic preservation and more like selective engagement, conserving energy defensively, pacing physically, and maximizing offensive production in ways that preserved the visual of dominance even when the full two-way force had faded. That distinction matters. Because in the GOAT debate, people don't just compare greatness. They compare how greatness looked. Jordan's mythology was built on peak violence. 6 finals, 6 wins, defensive terror, killer instinct. Kobe's mythology was built on obsession and visible suffering. Even in decline, he looked like a man willing to die publicly for every bucket. LeBron's mythology? For supporters, it's unmatched versatility and longevity. For critics like Barkley, it increasingly risks looking like volume. And volume is dangerous territory when your entire legacy is measured against Michael Jordan. Because once the argument shifts from dominance to accumulation, the criticism writes itself. Did LeBron surpass history? Or simply outlast it? That's why Barkley's comments hit harder than generic sports talk. He's not just saying LeBron is old. He's implying LeBron knows exactly what parts of his game are slipping and is compensating by doubling down on the one category history can never ignore. Production. 40,000 points. 10,000 rebounds. 10,000 assists. These numbers are absurd. But Barkley's camp sees them differently. They see a player obsessed with building statistical armor strong enough to survive weaknesses Jordan never had to answer for. And that's where retirement timing suddenly feels strategic. Because if LeBron keeps playing too long, the risk grows, not of losing records, but of changing perception. A 27-point triple-double sounds legendary, until fans watch the game and notice defensive lapses, slower rotations, or younger stars controlling stretches LeBron once owned. That's the danger of modern basketball scrutiny. Highlights celebrate, full games reveal, and Barkley's generation values revelation more than resume. To them, there's a difference between chasing banners and chasing benchmarks. Fair or unfair, that tension has become central to LeBron's final years. Especially because LeBron himself has often presented his career as bigger than numbers. Team first, legacy first, basketball purity. But critics point to moments that complicate that image: milestone watch, scoring pursuits, public legacy conversations, and ask whether the image of selfless greatness always matched the reality of legacy engineering. Then comes the Jordan problem. Because every extra season LeBron plays extends his records. but also extends the debate over why he's still playing. Is it love of the game? Love of competition? Or the relentless pursuit of one objective metric that can strengthen his case against the ghost he's chased since high school? Michael Jordan didn't need 40,000 points to become basketball's final boss. His argument was concentrated dominance. LeBron's is broader, longer, more layered, but also more vulnerable to interpretation. And Barkley knows that. That's why his criticism lands with old-school fans. He frames LeBron not as a failed player, but as a player so obsessed with legacy architecture that every move now feels connected to the scoreboard of history. Not just tonight's scoreboard. History's. Which means skipping a retirement tour suddenly looks less like avoiding attention, and more like avoiding prolonged evidence. Evidence that the body is losing. Evidence that the myth is aging. Evidence that while LeBron may absolutely be one of basketball's greatest forces, the closer he gets to the finish line, the harder it becomes to control how the world compares him to the one man he could never stop being measured against: Michael Jordan. And once that comparison becomes less about stats, and more about psychology, dominance, and why each man played, that's when Barkley's criticism stops sounding like hate, and starts sounding like the beginning of a much older war. The problem is, this tension did not start with one retirement report. It had been building for years. Long before LeBron reached the final stretch of his career, Charles Barkley had already become one of the loudest voices questioning the way LeBron handled power, pressure, and criticism. Not his talent, not his numbers, his mentality. And the first major fracture came in 2010. That summer changed the NBA forever. LeBron was not just leaving Cleveland. He was turning free agency into a television event. The decision became more than an announcement. It became a symbol. To LeBron's supporters, it was player empowerment. To his critics, it looked like a superstar choosing control over competition. Barkley saw it immediately. He did not frame it as a business move. He framed it as an escape. Because in Barkley's old-school basketball world, the great ones were supposed to fight through failure. They were supposed to lose, learn, suffer, and come back sharper. Jordan had to survive Detroit. Kobe had to endure chaos after Shaq. Greatness was supposed to be built through resistance, not redesigned through roster construction. So when LeBron joined Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh in Miami, Barkley viewed it as a line being crossed. Not because superstars had never teamed up before, but because LeBron was being compared to Michael Jordan. And Barkley's point was simple. Jordan was trying to destroy Magic and Bird. He was not trying to join them. That comparison followed LeBron everywhere. Every championship in Miami came with a footnote from critics. Yes, he won. Yes, he dominated. Yes, he became the most complete player in the league. But for old-school voices, the method mattered. The route mattered. The psychology mattered. And Barkley never let that part go. Because to him, the GOAT debate was never just a spreadsheet. It was character under pressure. Then, years later, the conflict got uglier. LeBron was back in Cleveland. He had delivered the city its impossible championship. He had come back from 3-1 against Golden State. He had given Cleveland the moment it had waited decades for. On paper, his legacy should have been safer than ever. But that is exactly when the pressure changed. The Cavaliers hit turbulence. The roster had problems. The Warriors were becoming a monster. And LeBron started publicly pushing for more help. To fans who loved him, it sounded like a superstar demanding the front office keep up with a historic opponent. To Barkley, it sounded like complaining. And once Barkley called it out, the entire situation detonated. He criticized LeBron for acting like the Cavaliers were some helpless underdog when they were already expensive, already loaded, and already built around his influence. Barkley's message was direct. If you are the best player in the world, stop making it sound like everyone else is failing you. That criticism cut deeper than usual, because it attacked the one part of LeBron's image he has always protected carefully: leadership. LeBron has spent his career presenting himself as the ultimate floor raiser, the genius decision-maker, the player coach, the man who sees the game 3 moves ahead of everyone else. But Barkley's criticism suggested something different. That when things got hard, LeBron did not just carry pressure. He redirected it onto teammates, onto coaches, onto front offices, onto anyone close enough to absorb the blame. And LeBron's response made the feud personal. Instead of keeping the argument on basketball, he fired back by bringing up Barkley's past mistakes, his off-court controversies, his old incidents, his reputation, his flaws as a man. That moment changed the tone forever. Because Barkley had attacked LeBron's basketball behavior. LeBron attacked Barkley's life. And that distinction matters. In sports media, criticism is part of the business. Legends get questioned. Stars get challenged. Analysts get loud. That is normal. But when LeBron responded that way, it gave Barkley's supporters exactly what they needed. A receipt. They saw a superstar who could handle praise, legacy debates, documentaries, applause, and global admiration, but could not handle a direct challenge from someone with enough status to say the quiet part out loud. That is why this feud never felt like simple television drama. It became philosophical. Barkley represented the old NBA conscience. Imperfect, blunt, sometimes harsh, but obsessed with competition and accountability. LeBron represented the modern superstar empire, powerful, strategic, media-aware, brand-protected, and impossible to separate from influence. One man believed criticism should stay about basketball. The other showed that if you hit his image hard enough, he might hit back somewhere much more personal. And that is where the retirement debate becomes more dangerous. Because Barkley's current criticism is not isolated. It connects to everything he has been saying for over a decade. The super team decision, the public pressure on teammates, the need for control, the sensitivity to criticism, the obsession with how history will remember him. Barkley is not just asking whether LeBron should have a farewell tour. He is asking whether LeBron has always wanted greatness without the parts of greatness that hurt the most. The public failure, the ugly decline, the criticism you cannot spin, the nights when the world sees you weakened and you still stand there anyway. And once that question enters the room, the story no longer belongs only to Barkley. Because the next controversy pulled in LeBron's son, the media machine, and the uncomfortable question nobody in basketball wanted to ask out loud. Then the conversation shifted into the most uncomfortable territory possible. Family. Because once Bronny James entered the NBA conversation, every debate around LeBron became more sensitive, more protected, and more explosive. This was no longer just about an aging superstar chasing one last chapter. This was about a father, a son, a franchise, and a media world that suddenly seemed terrified to speak honestly. Bronny's story was already emotional. He had dealt with a serious health scare. He carried one of the heaviest last names in sports. Every move he made was judged against impossible expectations. That part was real, and nobody serious could pretend the pressure on him was normal. But pressure does not erase basketball reality. And that is where the controversy began. People started asking a question the NBA media clearly did not want to touch too directly. Did Bronny earn his opportunity purely through performance? Or was his path shaped by the gravity of LeBron's power? That question alone was enough to make the entire basketball world tense. Because everyone understood the obvious conflict. Criticizing Bronny was not like criticizing a normal young player fighting for minutes. Criticizing Bronny meant stepping into LeBron's personal territory. And once that happened, analysts were not just judging stats anymore. They were risking a reaction. That is why the Stephen A. Smith situation became such a major symbol. Stephen A. built his career on loud opinions, uncomfortable takes, and dramatic TV arguments. He has criticized superstars, coaches, owners, and entire franchises without blinking. But when LeBron confronted him publicly over comments involving Bronny, the visual told its own story. This was not just disagreement. It looked like pressure. It looked like a superstar using his presence, his size, his status, and his influence to make a message clear. Talk about me all you want, but be careful with my son. For many fans, that was understandable. A father protecting his child is human. Any parent would feel something watching their son become a national debate topic. But Barkley's side of the argument cuts in a different direction. Because Bronny was not being discussed as a private citizen. He was being discussed as an NBA player. And once you are on an NBA roster, the conversation cannot be permanently protected by family emotion. Performance has to be fair game. Minutes have to be fair game. Roster spots have to be fair game. That is the uncomfortable line LeBron blurred. And Barkley noticed. He mocked the fear around criticizing Bronny because he understood what everyone else seemed too nervous to say. The media was not simply being respectful. It looked like they were calculating the cost of honesty. That is where the bully accusation hit hard. Not because Barkley was saying LeBron bullied people physically, but because influence can bully too. Access can bully. Relationships can bully. The fear of losing interviews, sources, league connections, or public favor can quietly shape what people are willing to say. And LeBron's influence is massive. He is not just a player. He is a brand, a business machine, a production company, a clutch sports power center, a cultural institution, and one of the most protected athletes in modern media. So when people suddenly tiptoe around obvious basketball questions, critics do not see kindness. They see control. That control is what makes Barkley dangerous to LeBron's image. Chuck does not need access. He does not need approval. He does not need LeBron's camp to like him. And because of that, he can say things other analysts soften. He can say the Bronny situation looks uncomfortable. He can say the media is afraid. He can say LeBron has too much power over how the story gets framed. And most importantly, he can connect it back to the larger pattern. Because this was never only about Bronny. It was about what happens when LeBron does not like a narrative. When the narrative is about his teammates, pressure moves there. When it is about roster construction, blame moves somewhere else. When it is about decline, the conversation shifts to longevity. When it is about criticism, the critic becomes the story. And when it is about Bronny, the media suddenly lowers its voice. That pattern is what Barkley has been attacking for years. The idea that LeBron's greatness comes with a force field around it. A force field that protects the brand, redirects criticism, and makes honest discussion feel dangerous. For LeBron's defenders, this is just the burden of being the most famous basketball player alive. Every superstar manages narratives. Every legend protects family. Every icon has influence. But for critics, the Bronny chapter revealed something deeper. It showed how far LeBron's power could reach beyond his own stat line. Into television debates. Into roster conversations. Into what analysts feel safe saying. Into the emotional politics of the league itself. And once that became part of the story, Barkley's criticism grew even bigger. Because now he was no longer just accusing LeBron of managing his ending. He was accusing him of managing the entire room. And the next question became even more damaging. If LeBron had that much influence over media narratives, how much influence had he already used over the teams he left behind? The Lakers were supposed to be the perfect final kingdom. Hollywood lights. Purple and gold history. A global fan base. A franchise built on legends who understood pressure, ego, championships, and spectacle. For LeBron, Los Angeles was never just another team. It was the place where basketball, business, family, media, legacy, and power could all exist in one frame. But that is exactly why the criticism became so sharp. Because when a player has that much influence, the wins belong to him. But so does the damage. And Barkley's argument is brutal because he does not separate LeBron the player from LeBron the power broker. To Chuck, you cannot take credit for controlling the room, shaping rosters, attracting stars, moving franchises, and building championship windows, then act confused when the bill comes due. That is why the Russell Westbrook trade became one of the biggest pieces of evidence against LeBron's late career leadership. The Lakers had already won a title with defense, size, discipline, and role players who understood their jobs. It was not always pretty, but it worked. They had balance. They had depth. They had players who could guard, cut, shoot enough, and survive without needing the ball every possession. Then the roster changed. Depth disappeared. Defense weakened. Fit became awkward. And suddenly, the Lakers were trying to make three high-usage stars work in a system where spacing, rhythm, and accountability were already fragile. To regular fans, it looked like a failed experiment. To Barkley, it looked like a superstar-driven mistake. Because the old-school view is simple: winning teams are not built by ego. They are built by fit. And that is where LeBron's critics see a repeated pattern. Miami was built around stars. Cleveland was constantly pressured to maximize the present. Los Angeles kept sacrificing future flexibility for immediate relevance. Every stop brought success, but every stop also brought exhaustion. Draft picks moved. Role players changed. Coaches took heat. Front offices were pushed into urgency. And when the window started closing, the same question followed. Who actually pays for the power once the superstar gets old? That question matters because LeBron's defenders can point to results. For championships, multiple finals runs. A ring in every city where he chose to build. That is not failure. That is historic. But Barkley's criticism is not that LeBron never won. It is that the cost of his winning style changed the league's culture. Player empowerment became player pressure. Roster control became roster chaos. Super teams became shortcuts. And teams started living in 2-year panic cycles instead of building something durable. That is why Chuck's anger goes beyond one franchise. He sees LeBron as the face of an era where stars stopped trusting competition and started engineering comfort. Where instead of fighting through imperfect rosters, players looked for the next perfect arrangement. Where instead of accepting responsibility when a team underperformed, the conversation turned toward needing more help, more shooters, more playmakers, more trades, more front office action. And in Barkley's world, that sounds soft. Not physically soft. Mentally soft. Because old-school NBA respect was built on endurance. You stayed. You fought. You got embarrassed. You came back. You did not always get a better roster by February. You did not always get another star. You did not always get the perfect spacing. Sometimes greatness meant dragging a flawed team deeper than it deserved to go. Sometimes greatness meant absorbing blame without sending signals through the media. Sometimes greatness meant suffering in public without turning every setback into a negotiation. That is why Barkley always brings the conversation back to Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant. Jordan took years of punishment before Chicago broke through. Kobe survived ugly seasons after Shaq left, carrying impossible expectations while the franchise rebuilt around him. Neither career was clean. Neither man was easy. But to their defenders, the struggle strengthened the mythology. With LeBron, critics argue the struggle often became leverage. And Los Angeles magnified that perception, because the Lakers are not just any franchise. Their history is ruthless. Magic, Kobe, banners everywhere, expectations everywhere, fans who do not care about excuses. In that environment, every failed roster move becomes louder. Every public comment becomes suspicious. Every aging superstar possession becomes a referendum. So when the Lakers looked thin, inconsistent, and trapped between LeBron's timeline and the franchise's future, Barkley saw the full picture. Not just a team trying to survive. A franchise bent around one man's final legacy project. And that connects directly to his complaints about the modern NBA. Load management, superstar partnerships, second apron restrictions, front offices terrified of upsetting players, media narratives built around individual brands instead of team responsibility. To Barkley, LeBron did not create every problem alone. That would be too simple. But he became the symbol, the biggest star of the player empowerment age. The athlete who proved one superstar could reshape organizations, control narratives, pressure executives, influence media, and still present every outcome as part of a heroic journey. That is why Barkley's criticism keeps landing, because it is not just about what LeBron accomplished. It is about what basketball became while he was accomplishing it. And now, as the final chapter approaches, the question is no longer whether LeBron was powerful. Everyone knows he was. The question is whether that power built a legacy too large to question, or left behind enough damage that the legends will never fully bow to it. The final question is not whether LeBron James is great. That debate is over. You do not reach his records by accident. You do not dominate multiple eras by luck. You do not carry championship pressure for more than 20 years without being one of the most important players basketball has ever seen. But this story was never really about greatness alone. It was about the kind of greatness people respect without needing to be convinced. And that is where the argument becomes dangerous. Because LeBron's resume is enormous, but his legacy has always required explanation. Supporters explain the longevity. They explain the finals losses. They explain the team changes. They explain the roster pressure. They explain the media criticism. They explain why the numbers should matter more than the rings, why the era should matter, why the context should matter. With Michael Jordan, the argument is colder. 6 finals, 6 wins, 6 finals MVPs. No collapse on the biggest stage. No public chase for the ghost ahead of him. No farewell tour needed to protect the ending. Jordan's mythology feels simple because it was built on domination. LeBron's mythology feels larger, but also more complicated, because it was built across movement, reinvention, longevity, and constant narrative management. That does not make LeBron small. It makes his legacy more vulnerable. And Barkley understands that vulnerability better than most. He is not attacking LeBron because LeBron lacked talent. That would be ridiculous. He is attacking the gap between LeBron's achievements and the old-school standard of unquestioned competitive respect. To Barkley, the greatest player cannot need the room controlled for him. He cannot need criticism softened. He cannot need the roster constantly adjusted. He cannot need the ending carefully staged. He has to stand in the fire and let the game judge him. That is why the retirement tour controversy matters. A farewell tour is not just applause. It is a public surrender to time. Every legend eventually has to stand in front of the crowd and admit, without saying it, that the body is losing. Kobe did that. He gave fans the ugly version and the beautiful version at the same time. The missed shots, the forced attempts, the pain, the stubbornness, the final explosion. Nothing about it was efficient, but everything about it felt honest. That honesty is what made it powerful. If LeBron walks away without that kind of visible ending, his defenders will call it dignity. His critics will call it control. And the truth may sit somewhere in the middle. Maybe LeBron does not owe anyone a farewell tour. Maybe after carrying the league for so long, he has earned the right to leave however he wants. Maybe the obsession with watching legends decline says more about fans than it says about him. But Barkley's point still cuts. Because LeBron has never been treated like a normal superstar. He has been treated like a movement, a corporation, a king, a debate that never ends. And when you build a career that large, the exit becomes part of the trial. Every choice becomes evidence. No tour. Evidence. Bronny's roster story. Evidence. Media confrontations. Evidence. Team construction. Evidence. Stat milestones. Evidence. Jordan comparisons. Evidence. That is the burden of chasing the greatest title in sports. You do not just get judged by what you did. You get judged by how you carried it. And for Barkley, that is where LeBron falls short of the legends he is compared to. Not because he failed to produce. Not because he failed to win. But because too much of the journey looked managed, protected, negotiated, and defended. The old legends did not always have cleaner careers. They had flaws. They had ego. They had ugly moments. But their respect feels different because their mythology does not need constant maintenance. Nobody has to campaign for Jordan's killer instinct. Nobody has to explain Kobe's obsession. Nobody has to convince people that those men wanted the hardest road possible. With LeBron, the debate never stops. And maybe that is the clearest answer. If a player is truly the unquestioned greatest, the room eventually goes quiet. With LeBron, the room only gets louder. Barkley's words hit because they tap into the doubt people usually whisper around. The fear that LeBron may finish with the numbers, the money, the influence, the documentaries, the sun beside him, and still not own the one thing he wanted most. Unanimous respect. That is the one trophy no front office can trade for. No media company can produce. No stat graphic can manufacture. And no farewell strategy can guarantee. So now the ending belongs to the audience. Was LeBron smart for controlling his final chapter? Or was Barkley right that the king is avoiding the one spotlight he cannot fully command? Before you decide, subscribe to HOOPRADAR for the basketball stories behind the headlines, the pressure, ego, rivalries, and legacy battles the media softens. And drop your answer in the comments. Is LeBron protecting his legacy, or is he running from the truth?